I can't marry you again. You are too ugly for my liking.
After her dad, who was a secret billionaire, died, husband divorced pregnant wife to marry Mistress. She was 5 months pregnant when her father died. To the world, he was just a quiet old man who lived modestly. No flashy cars, no private jets, no headlines. Even her husband believed she came from nothing. Then the funeral ended, and everything changed. Before the mourning cloth was folded, her husband was already distant, cold, calculating. He said the pregnancy was too much stress, said he wasn't ready to be a father. But the truth? He had already chosen someone else, a woman younger, flashier, ambitious. He filed for divorce while she was still grieving, left her carrying his child, and walked straight into the arms of his mistress. What he didn't know, the poor old man who just died, was a secret billionaire. And the only heir was the woman he just abandoned. Now she's not just a pregnant ex-wife. She's a powerful woman with a legacy worth billions, and he's about to learn some divorces don't end marriages. They end destinies. Before we continue this amazing story, please hit that subscribe button now, like this video, and comment below where you are watching from and what time it is in your country. Now let's see what happened next. Rain hammered the glass walls of their Lecky apartment as she folded her father's burial cloth with trembling fingers. The scent of incense still clung to her hair. 5 months pregnant, her back aching, her eyes swollen from days of crying. The house felt colder than the Harmattan breeze outside. Then the door clicked open behind her. Slow, measured. Her husband stepped in without greeting, without warmth. His shoes were dry despite the storm, like he had been waiting somewhere safe while she drowned alone, and in his hand, thin white papers that looked too official to mean anything good. Thunder cracked across the sky as he placed the envelope on the marble table. He did not sit beside her. He stood across from her like a landlord inspecting property. His voice came smooth, almost rehearsed, slicing through the silence with surgical calm. He spoke about peace, about pressure, about how the pregnancy was too much right now. His eyes avoided her stomach as if the child had already become a burden. The calmness felt louder than shouting. It felt calculated. And that was when fear began crawling up her spine. Wind pushed rain against the windows as she searched his face for the man who once kissed her forehead before work. That man was gone. In his place stood someone distant, someone already halfway out the door. He spoke about timing being wrong, about needing space to find himself. But grief had barely settled in her bones. Her father was not even buried for a full week. And now this? The room felt like it was shrinking, oxygen thinning with every word he delivered so neatly. She realized something terrifying. This decision had been made long before tonight. Lightning flashed, revealing the small overnight bag resting near the hallway. Packed, ready, waiting. Her heartbeat stuttered as she understood this wasn't impulse. This wasn't emotion. This was planning. He had organized his exit like a business transaction. No raised voice, no dramatic fight. Just documents prepared, signature lines marked, timelines already structured. Even the lawyer's stamp was fresh. The pregnancy was not the problem. The funeral was not the problem. She wasn't the problem. He had simply chosen another path, and it did not include her. Silence expanded between them as generator hum filled the background. He avoided touching her, as if physical contact might complicate his script. She watched his fingers drum lightly on the table, impatient, eager to be free. 5 months pregnant, carrying his child, and he looked relieved. That was the part that shattered something deep inside her chest. Relief. As though walking away from a grieving wife was liberation. The man who once promised forever now treated forever like a subscription he could cancel. Cold air from the AC brushed her damp cheeks as she noticed his wedding ring was gone. The small, pale mark around his finger glowed under the ceiling light, like evidence of a lie recently removed. She hadn't even noticed when he stopped wearing it. Maybe during those late-night work calls. Maybe during those unexplained gym sessions. Maybe during the long showers where he guarded his phone like state secrets. Looking back, the signs were there. She just didn't know she was supposed to be watching. Footsteps echoed toward the door as he lifted the bag and paused only long enough to say he hoped she would understand one day. The handle turned. The storm outside swallowed him whole. And as the door shut, the apartment felt unfamiliar, like a stage after the audience has left. She stood alone, palm resting on her stomach, his heart racing with a question too heavy to hold. If he could abandon her in her weakest moment, what else had he been capable of all along? Morning sunlight spilled across the small bungalow in old Lecky Phase 1 as dust floated through narrow beams of light. The house looked ordinary, cream walls slightly faded, gate paint peeling at the edges, an old Toyota parked outside like it had been there forever. This was the house people whispered about with pity. This was where her father lived. No guards, no convoy, no noise. Even her husband used to shake his head softly, calling the old man comfortable but basic. But simplicity can be camouflage, and camouflage hides things no one expects. Flashback memories flickered like film reels as she stood in that quiet living room. Her father at the dining table was reading financial newspapers before sunrise, glasses low on his nose. His phone would buzz once, never twice, and he would step outside to answer. Short calls, coded phrases, calm nods. She remembered the way black SUVs sometimes rolled past the street without stopping, engines humming like restrained power. She had assumed they belonged to richer neighbors. Now those memories rearranged themselves into something heavier. Evening heat used to settle thick in the compound as her father watered his small garden himself. No staff, no security, just him in faded Ankara shorts, tending hibiscus flowers with quiet patience. But sometimes men in tailored suits would arrive just before dusk. They never stayed long. They never parked directly outside. They called him Sir, with a respect that felt misplaced for someone so ordinary. She had once asked him what business he was doing. He only smiled and said timing reveals everything. Rain would tap gently on his zinc extension roof while he locked himself in the study at the back of the house. That room always smelled different. Leather, ink, something metallic. She remembered thick files stacked neatly inside a wooden cabinet. No labels, no decoration, just order. When she once tried to open a drawer, he gently stopped her hand and said some doors open when protection is no longer needed. At the time, it sounded poetic. Now it felt strategic. Protection from who? Protection for what? Sunday mornings were always quiet rituals. He would dress in simple native attire, ironed but modest, and drive himself to church. No escort. No announcement. He would sit in the third row, head bowed, as if blending in was the mission. But occasionally, she noticed people turning to greet him with unusual reverence. A quick handshake, a respectful nod, a whisper exchanged. Influence moved around him like perfume, subtle but unmistakable, and she began to wonder how deep his silence really ran. Late one Harmattan evening, she remembered overhearing fragments of a conversation through the study door. Words like shares, transfer, expansion, and global partners floated into the hallway before the door clicked shut. The air had felt tense that night, protective, deliberate. He later joined her in the living room, smiling gently, asking about her marriage like nothing significant was happening behind that locked door. He never bragged, never explained. He carried secrets the way oceans carry depth, calm on the surface, unstoppable underneath. Now, standing alone in that same house after his burial, she traced her fingers along the wooden desk where his phone once rested. The world saw a quiet old man. Her husband saw a father-in-law with nothing to offer. But memories were rearranging like puzzle pieces snapping into place. The simplicity had not been poverty, it had been strategy, and if her father had lived his entire life unseen on purpose, what exactly had he been protecting her from all this time? Rain splattered hard against the glass walls of their lecky apartment, distorting the neon lights of passing traffic into blurred streaks of red and gold. She stood near the window, 5 months pregnant, clutching the letter again. Divorce papers. Her husband's signature neat at the bottom. Calm, calculated, too calm. The man who once whispered love in her ear now stood across the room like a stranger, posture stiff, eyes unreadable. The warmth she had relied on for years had vanished overnight, replaced by something cold and clinical, something she didn't recognize, yet had always been there. She recalled the nights he returned late, the faint smell of perfume not hers lingering on his sleeves, the locked phone screens, the sudden gym memberships, the business trips that cropped up without warning. Each incident alone could have been dismissed as coincidence or stress, but now they formed a pattern, a map of betrayal traced in silence. She had ignored the small signs, convinced love would cover cracks. But cracks widen when ignored, and the foundation of their marriage was rotting under the weight of secrets. In the kitchen, the kettle boiled, steam curling like whispers in the air. She watched him carefully, noting the slight tension in his jaw, the way he avoided her gaze. There had been moments, tiny slips, where she glimpsed the man beneath the mask, a man who prioritized convenience over commitment, ambition over affection. Yet he had perfected the performance of devotion. Smiles, compliments, pretend concern, all smoke and mirrors layered over a core of indifference. How long had she been living in the shadow of an actor, mistaking his rehearsed warmth for sincerity? The hallway light flickered above as he approached the sofa. He did not sit. He merely folded his arms, a calculated posture, and spoke softly about needing space and peace. Her stomach twisted as she imagined the meetings, the whispered plans, the hidden rendezvous she would never have known about. It was as if their life together had been a chessboard, and she had been playing with blinders on. Every loving gesture, every tender word, now revealed itself as a move in a quiet strategy of abandonment. She moved toward the bedroom, hands trembling slightly, tracing the hem of her maternity dress. Memories surfaced, laughing together at Lecky Market, quiet evenings on the balcony, dreams whispered under moonlight. Each memory now felt tainted, a painful echo of what was never real. A betrayal, she realized, doesn't always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it sneaks in like a shadow, a cold draft under the door, turning the familiar into the unfamiliar. And when it fully lands, it crushes the soul with quiet precision. The city hummed outside, traffic lights blinking rhythmically, oblivious to her heartbreak. She ran her fingers over the divorce papers again, tracing the ink as if memorizing every stroke. How does a man decide, in the midst of grief and pregnancy, to walk away? How could he have known the power of absence, the devastation of leaving someone when they are most vulnerable? Questions rose and crashed inside her like waves against the Lecky coastline, relentless, cold, unanswered. That night she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folded funeral cloth in the corner. Her father's absence weighed heavy, yet the betrayal in front of her felt heavier still. The man she had loved, trusted, built a life with, had revealed himself fully, not in words, but in actions. And as the rain tapped the windows like a drumbeat counting down time, she realized the most painful truth. Sometimes the ones who swear loyalty are the first to abandon, and masks can slip when opportunity knocks. The question now hung in the room. What would she do with the life, the child, and the freedom that betrayal had unexpectedly handed her? Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows of a high-rise Lecky apartment, glinting off polished marble floors and chrome fixtures. She stepped inside with a confident smile, heels clicking on the floor like the ticking of a clock counting someone else's downfall. her hair perfectly styled, nails immaculate, phone buzzing with messages of congratulations. To anyone watching, she had arrived, officially, fully, in the life she had long coveted. But victory, she didn't know, was already slipping through her fingers. Her ambition had blinded her to more than love. It had blinded her to consequence. She posed in front of the mirror, adjusting a designer dress, eyes glinting with triumph. Every reflection reinforced the illusion. The man, the money, the power, all hers. She believed she had upgraded, that she had taken the place of a wife she considered weak, replaceable. Yet she missed the subtle signs, the small inheritances of respect and loyalty that had quietly surrounded her predecessor. She assumed love was transactional, status a reward, and loyalty optional. The world she imagined she was stepping into was a palace built on sand, and the tide was rising silently. In the kitchen, she poured champagne into crystal flutes, the bubbles rising like her own inflated expectations. She scrolled through her phone, laughing at congratulatory messages from friends and colleagues. She didn't see the folded maternity dress in her predecessor's closet, the quiet resilience simmering behind grief. She didn't hear the soft determination forming in a heart that had been underestimated. All she saw was a man she believed she had claimed and a life she thought she had secured. Yet the universe often moves quietly before delivering a reckoning. The balcony overlooked the bustling Lekki streets, cars honking, lights flickering, life moving forward oblivious to the hidden truths above. She imagined the next party, the next social post, the next public appearance confirming her status. She didn't notice the patterns of loyalty and character that money cannot buy, the subtle threads that would one day unravel everything she assumed was hers. Confidence can be intoxicating, but so can blindness, and hers was feeding a slow, invisible storm. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. "You're the real winner now." She smiled, sipping champagne, feeling the warmth of victory creep in. But somewhere in the shadows of ambition, something else stirred. Whispers of the past, echoes of the woman she had replaced, a legacy she did not yet understand. Each bubble in the glass reflected a fragile illusion, shimmering and perfect, ready to burst. She believed she had the future planned, but the present was quietly slipping into another's hands. In her office, she reviewed contracts and statements, thinking of investments and plans. The man beside her was busy with work, oblivious to the quiet storm he had unleashed. She felt the thrill of proximity to wealth, the seductive power of being chosen over another. Yet she had yet to realize that proximity does not equal possession, that choice is a fleeting illusion when destiny intervenes. Her triumph was premature, her certainty untested, and the city outside hummed with unseen possibilities that could tip the scales. Night fell over Lekki, the city lights sparkling like a reflection of ambition itself. She sat back, heels off, phone in hand, imagining the applause and envy waiting for her tomorrow. But in the shadows, in quiet spaces untouched by her awareness, the seeds of reversal had already been sown. What she believed was victory was merely the opening act. And as the moonlight touched her polished features, the question lingered unspoken. Could confidence built on illusions survive the weight of truth? Rain drummed softly against the corrugated roof of the small chapel in Lekki, mingling with the muted sobs of mourners. She clutched her father's folded burial cloth against her chest, the fabric still carrying the faint scent of sandalwood and old leather. The air was thick with grief, incense, and whispered condolences. And then, in the midst of mourning, he handed her the papers. Divorce. Cold, calculated, delivered like a verdict rather than a decision. Her hands trembled. The room seemed to tilt. Eyes followed, some filled with pity, others with barely concealed judgment. A distant cousin nudged her shoulder, whispering something she couldn't fully hear over the pounding of her heart. The words didn't matter. The shame radiated off every gaze. Neighbors, friends, even the florist arranging lilies at the altar seemed to shrink back, curious and silent witnesses to her humiliation. Her husband's calm face contrasted sharply with the storm inside her. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply stood, detached, as if the grief, her pregnancy, and the family's loss were inconveniences in his perfectly ordered life. The air smelled of wet soil and flowers. Her father's casket lay ahead, open, surrounded by mourners in black. The gravity of life and death clashed violently with betrayal, creating a suffocating tension. Each footstep on the polished floor sounded louder than usual. She tried to focus on the sermons, the prayers, the hymns, but her eyes kept darting to the papers in her hands. The ink felt like acid on her fingers, burning through trust, love, and memory. She wondered if anyone could understand the weight of abandonment wrapped in grief. Outside, the street glistened from the rain, cars splashing through puddles, creating small chaos that mirrored the storm in her heart. She could hear whispers as she passed relatives and neighbors, their curiosity sharp, their judgment palpable. 5 months pregnant and already divorced. The words stung. Her cheeks burned, not from the weather but from the sudden realization that shame can be a spectator sport. Even the youngest cousins avoided her gaze, sensing that the familiar security of family ties had been ruptured forever. The chapel's doors swung open, letting in a gust of humid air from the streets of Lekki. She felt exposed, every heartbeat amplified in the hush. Her husband followed, his polished shoes silent on the wet tiles. He glanced around once, then back at her, eyes cold and detached. The world had shifted in a moment. The sanctuary of mourning had become a theater of betrayal. Every whisper, every glance, every folded hand seemed to punctuate her vulnerability. She questioned reality. Could one man's choice truly unravel a lifetime of shared trust? She looked down at the papers again, rainwater dripping from her umbrella onto the black folds of her dress. The ink seemed darker in the dim chapel light, sharper than any dagger. Her mind raced, thinking of the nights she had trusted, the plans she had made, the dreams she had shared with a man who now abandoned her. The gravity of the betrayal pressed against her chest, heavier than grief itself. For a fleeting moment, she imagined confronting him in front of everyone, letting the storm of hurt speak aloud. But the thought dissolved. Grief and dignity held her back. As the ceremony ended and mourners began to file out, she remained in place, clutching her father's cloth and the divorce papers. The rain outside fell harder, mirroring the tumult in her soul. A life that had once felt secure now seemed unrecognizable. The whispers continued, softer now but no less sharp, as she walked slowly down the aisle, each step measured, deliberate, a quiet declaration that she was still standing. Yet beneath the surface, a question gnawed relentlessly. What would she do with a heart shattered by both death and betrayal? The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of her father's Lekki estate, casting long shadows over the polished mahogany floors. Lawyers in crisp suits murmured quietly. Papers shuffled, pens clicked. She sat stiffly in the center of the room, 5 months pregnant, her hands resting on her belly, trembling slightly. The air smelled of polished wood, ink, and faint traces of sandalwood. Every eye in the room was on her, some calculating, some skeptical, some already imagining their cut. And then the lead lawyer cleared his throat, stillness falling like a heavy curtain. He began reading the will slowly, deliberately, each word carrying weight. Properties sprawled across Lagos, Abuja, and even Port Harcourt. Bank accounts tucked into offshore havens, investments in tech, energy, and media. Each revelation drew gasps from distant relatives, the whispers swelling into murmurs. The numbers weren't just large, they were staggering, impossible to process. The man she had grown up calling just dad was no pauper, no quiet retiree. He had been building an empire in plain sight, hidden in silence. The room shifted, the air thick with shock. Her husband, the man who had so casually abandoned her days before, sat rigid, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He leaned forward, trying to catch every figure, every property, every clause. His confidence faltered as realization crept in. He had underestimated the quiet man he had mocked. Even the relatives who had pitied her now turned pale, their anticipation twisting into disbelief. The power dynamic had changed without a sound. She, the discarded and humiliated, was suddenly the epicenter of wealth and authority. Her fingers clutched the armrest as the lawyer continued, naming investments and accounts that seemed like fiction. Offshore holdings, luxury properties, a private fleet, and board memberships she never imagined. She felt a strange mix of awe and disbelief. The room was quiet now, the usual chatter of inheritance speculations silenced by magnitude. Eyes darted nervously between her and the papers, unsure whether to congratulate, manipulate, or retreat. In that moment, wealth itself became a weapon, shifting respect, loyalty, and fear in equal measure. The pregnant woman's heartbeat accelerated. Memories of nights spent comforting a father she thought was modest now collided with this revelation. He had hidden it all to protect her, to shield her from greedy hands and prying eyes. Like every sacrifice, every quiet warning, every coded conversation made sense now. The modest car, the faded shirts, the simple home, they had been a carefully constructed veil over a legacy too powerful to risk. And suddenly, the injustice of her husband's betrayal felt almost petty against the magnitude of what she now held. Whispers rose again as distant relatives began to murmur, faces tight with envy and disbelief. "She's the only heir?" someone asked quietly. Aunts clutched pearls, uncles adjusted ties, some discreetly pulled out phones. The room felt like a storm about to break, the quiet tension buzzing beneath the surface. Even her own pulse seemed loud in her ears. What would they do now? Would greed overcome decorum, or would respect for the late patriarch hold sway? Every eye on her was a question, every glance a test of composure. As the lawyer placed the signed will on the desk, she finally exhaled, a quiet tremor running through her body. The storm of betrayal, the heartbreak, the grief, all of it now collided with an unexpected twist of destiny. The quiet man everyone underestimated had left more than wealth. He had left power, protection, and opportunity. And she realized, with a chill and a thrill, that the life she had thought over, the path that seemed shattered by divorce and grief, had just taken a turn none of them had anticipated. The question now lingered. How would she wield it? Sunlight slanted through the tall glass windows of the Lecky mansion, highlighting dust motes floating like tiny stars over the polished marble floors. She sat on the edge of a velvet armchair, her hand resting protectively over her rounded belly, feeling the tiny kicks of life within her. The room was silent, the hum of air conditioning and faint city traffic outside the only sound. Her father's will lay open before her, every line a declaration. Everything belonged to her. Not scattered shares, not distant cousins, not charities. Everything. The empire was hers, and the magnitude was dizzying. The distant relatives shifted uncomfortably in the heavy silence, their eyes darting from her to the pages, calculating, scheming, and finally understanding the truth. The pregnant woman who had been mocked, abandoned, and whispered about had become the focal point of unimaginable wealth. Every property, every bank account, every hidden asset pointed directly to her. In that instant, power shifted imperceptibly but permanently. The room, once full of anticipation for division, now bristled with envy and disbelief. She felt a strange mix of fear, awe, and exhilaration. What had been a period of mourning was now a pivot point for destiny. Her heart beat rapidly as the realization sank in. The man who had divorced her days after her father's funeral, the man who had walked away from her in her weakest season, was now irrelevant. The world she thought had rejected her had already shifted under her feet. The empire she had inherited wasn't just wealth, it was influence, leverage, and validation. Every decision, every action she would take now carried weight far beyond her imagination. And she felt the smallest smile tug at the corner of her lips. The very hands that had abandoned her had unknowingly handed her the keys to her triumph. The air seemed heavier as whispers filled the room again, softer this time. The distant relatives were calculating, realizing there was no room for argument. Even the most arrogant uncle and the most envious cousin had no recourse. She could see it in their faces, the surprise, the subtle panic, the recognition that they had underestimated her. Her father had left her more than money. He had left her the power to command respect, to dictate the narrative, and to turn betrayal into opportunity. Every step she took from this moment forward would be guided by the knowledge that destiny was now firmly in her hands. Outside the windows, the city of Lagos shimmered, sunlight reflecting off skyscrapers and the turquoise waters of Lekki's lagoon. Life moved on for everyone else, oblivious to the quiet revolution inside this mansion. She felt the weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders, the baby she carried, the legacy she had just inherited, and the future she would carve. Each breath was heavy with possibility, each thought a careful calculation of what came next. The pregnancy that once made her vulnerable now grounded her, gave her focus, and became the anchor of her emerging power. She touched her belly gently, feeling the baby shift. A sense of clarity washed over her. This was no longer about revenge or regret. This was about legacy. Every property, every account, every hidden business was now a tool to shape a future she would command. The world that had whispered and judged, that had abandoned and humiliated, was now irrelevant. She had inherited more than wealth. She had inherited authority, destiny, and a story that would outlive the whispers of betrayal. And in that realization, she felt a fierce resolve ignite within her. As the lawyer quietly gathered his documents, the pregnant woman rose slowly, her shadow stretching across the marble floor like a herald of change. The room seemed to pulse with a new energy, an invisible shift that only she fully understood. The empire was hers. The inheritance was hers. The power, the destiny, and the chance to rise unshaken were all hers. And in that charged silence, one question lingered, heavy and unspoken. How would the man who abandoned her feel when he realized she was no longer the woman he discarded, but the ruler of everything he thought he could possess? The streets of Lekki buzzed with the usual afternoon hum. Street hawkers calling, car horns piercing, and the distant wail of a siren. But inside her new office, silence reigned. She sat behind a wide mahogany desk, scanning letters, gift baskets, and envelopes stacked neatly from the neighbors who once whispered behind her back. Their tone had shifted from pity to politeness, envy to admiration. The same hands that had scorned her now extended bows, handshakes, and invitations. Lagos had changed its perception overnight, and she was the epicenter of that transformation. How quickly people shifted when the scent of power filled the air. The community elders who once raised eyebrows at her modest living now nodded with reverence, offering praise for her late father's wisdom and her inherited success. Their words rang hollow, but she listened, observing every twitch, every hesitation, every calculated smile. They didn't see her, not really. They saw the wealth she now wielded. And in that realization, a cold satisfaction settled over her. Respect bought with money was different, sharper, more potent than any kindness ever offered in ignorance. How long before admiration would turn back into envy, she wondered, tracing the fine lines of their faces. Relatives who had avoided her for years now sought her counsel, smiling too brightly, dropping subtle hints about family unity and future collaborations. She watched quietly, fingers drumming against polished wood, as one cousin's eyes flicked nervously at her growing belly. There was fear there, buried beneath the practiced charm, a recognition that the tables had turned. She had been the discarded, the overlooked, the underdog. Now she was untouchable, and every whispered judgment was powerless against the authority she now commanded. Could they forgive the years of neglect, or would they resent her rise in silence? Every gift that arrived, flowers, baskets of exotic fruits, even small luxury items, felt like tiny confessions, unspoken admissions of misjudgment. She handled each with grace, placing them meticulously in the corner of her office where sunlight caught the ribbons. Each package was a symbol of acknowledgement, a subtle recalibration of social hierarchy. In the marketplace of Lagos society, power and perception were currency, and she was now rich in both. How far would this shift ripple? Who would attempt to reclaim their lost influence, and at what cost to themselves? From her window, the city shimmered with opportunity. Skyscrapers gleamed, billboards flashed advertisements for luxury brands, and the rhythmic movement of the lagoon mirrored the flow of fortune. She felt herself anchored to the city in a new way, not just as a resident, but as a figure of consequence. Eyes followed her as she walked to her car. Whispers filled the streets. Some people noticed, and the social tide had turned decisively. Those who had scorned her were now spectators of her ascent, forced to witness what they had dismissed. How long could they hide their envy behind forced civility? Even the once snide neighbors, the women who had stared with judgment, the men who had chuckled at her supposed inadequacy, now approached with polite bows and carefully chosen compliments. Each interaction was a test of control, a subtle measure of who could adapt and who would crumble under exposure. She smiled politely, masking the sharp awareness of her own newfound leverage. The city was learning a lesson she had known all along. Respect must be earned, but sometimes it could be commanded by the simple shift of circumstance. Would anyone dare challenge her now? As evening fell over Lekki, casting long shadows across the lagoon and the streets, she stood on the balcony of her father's mansion. The glow of the city lights reflected off her eyes, sharp, calculating, alive. Lagos had whispered behind her back, judged her, and underestimated her. Now every glance carried a mix of awe and caution. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the life inside her, the future she was shaping. Power had turned the tide, respect had been won, and the whispers of gossip had transformed into murmurs of fear and admiration. But a single question lingered, unspoken and heavy. Who would be first to challenge her new authority? And at what price? Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of her father's mansion, painting golden streaks across polished floors as she traced her fingers along the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. Her hand instinctively rested on her growing belly, the small curve a reminder that she carried both a child and a legacy. Every heartbeat of the life inside her echoed a promise, a reason to rise above the betrayal that had once threatened to crush her spirit. Tears had once been her constant companion, but now they were replaced by a quiet resolve. Could pain truly be transformed into power? The boardroom awaited, and she entered with a measured step, heels clicking against marble floors. Her presence commanded attention. Executives who had once ignored her calls now leaned in, offering updates, proposals, and hesitant admiration. She flipped through contracts with precision, her mind sharper than ever. But her eyes softened as she rested them on the documents that would secure her child's future. Every decision carried weight. Every signature a stroke in a masterpiece she was painting. How could a woman, once discarded, now wield such silent authority? Morning traffic hummed below her balcony as she sipped bitter coffee, steam curling into the warm Lekki air. Her thoughts lingered on the injustice of her past. The husband who had abandoned her, the neighbors who had whispered, the relatives who had laughed. But none of it mattered now. She had a purpose far greater than vengeance. Each sip of coffee was a reminder that she was alive, strong, and carrying the next generation. Could anyone understand the quiet strength of a mother who had turned heartbreak into ambition? The nursery, once a quiet, empty room, now vibrated with intention. She walked between soft pastel walls and carefully arranged toys, imagining her child learning, growing, and one day taking their place in a world she was reshaping. The life inside her was a daily motivator, pushing her to read, to study financial reports, to understand every nuance of contracts that once would have intimidated her. Each small step forward was fueled by a love deeper than any betrayal she had endured. Could she ensure this child would never feel the weight of humiliation she once carried? Evenings were the hardest, when silence filled the mansion and memories crept like shadows along the walls. Yet she embraced the quiet, turning reflection into strategy. She planned, mapped, and prepared, every calculation anchored to the child she would soon bring into the world. The grief that had once hollowed her out now gave rise to determination, each pulse of her heart echoing a message: "You will not fail." She whispered promises to her unborn child, letting hope fill the spaces where sorrow had lived. Would her resolve be enough to transform legacy into lasting power? Her hands moved over spreadsheets late into the night, the city lights of Lekki twinkling like distant stars through floor-to-ceiling windows. She studied numbers, graphs, and investment opportunities, the world outside alive with possibility. Each sound, the hum of a nearby generator, the distant laughter of neighbors, reminded her that life moved forward and she would not be left behind. Pregnancy had once felt like vulnerability, but now it was armor, a source of clarity and focus that sharpened her vision. Could anyone, even the husband who abandoned her, grasp the transformation she had undergone? As midnight approached, she sat by the window, hands on her belly, listening to the rhythm of life within her. The city slept, unaware of the mother who had risen from despair into determination, who would ensure her child never knew the sting of betrayal or the ache of powerlessness. She closed her eyes, feeling strength pulse through every limb, a steady hum of purpose that no one could shake. The unborn child was no longer a passive symbol. They were the reason, the motivation, the inheritance of hope she had forged from sorrow. And one lingering question remained in her mind. When the world next tried to underestimate her, would they realize she had already won? The first headline hit his phone like a punch to the gut. Lagos traffic roared outside his apartment, but inside a cold silence wrapped around him. His new life, built on stolen security and ambition, was cracking under the weight of revelation. The woman he thought powerless, the ex-wife he had abandoned while she carried his child, was now a billionaire. Every bank account, every property, every investment he had mocked now belonged to her. Panic pricked at his chest. How had he miscalculated so completely? He paced the marble floors of his sleek Lekki apartment, the polished surfaces reflecting his tension. The mistress, dressed in a sharp blazer, scrolled her phone with a growing impatience, her excitement at his rise replaced by frustration. She had imagined luxury and status, but instead, they now lived under the shadow of her greed and his misstep. Every message from the media, every gossip headline chipped at his confidence. Could he repair the life he had so carelessly tried to build? Evenings were worst. Social media buzzed with news of his ex-wife's inheritance, and every post a reminder of his own failure. Colleagues whispered behind hands, friends avoided eye contact, and the world watched him flounder. He had once wielded power and charm effortlessly, but now he felt exposed, small, and painfully human. Regret settled in his chest like a stone, heavier than any pride he had once carried. How could he reclaim what he had thought was forever his? Late-night calls from financial advisors only deepened the sting. Investments he had made in haste were failing, luxury cars lost value overnight, and the mistress's confidence faltered. She had expected wealth, not struggle, and now questioned whether the man she had chased was the prize or the burden. He realized too late that fortune is never just numbers. It is timing, foresight, and relationships. And he had ignored all three. Could he survive the consequences of his own misjudgment? He wandered through the empty rooms of his new home, the silence a mirror to the chaos outside. Every wall, every chandelier, every expensive trinket mocked him with its hollow brilliance. His ex-wife's shadow loomed larger than ever, her calm strength, her rising empire, her dignity intact. He remembered the day he signed those divorce papers, thinking himself clever. Now, each memory of abandonment twisted into humiliation. Could he ever face her without shame? In a crowded boardroom, whispers began to circulate. Clients spoke of her inheritance, investors sought her counsel, and her influence spread faster than he could contain. He had underestimated her resilience, her intellect, and the power of a mother protecting her child. The realization burned hotter than any anger. He had abandoned not just a wife, but a force that would outpace him at every turn. How could he compete with a destiny he had tried to ignore? The mistress finally confronted him, her voice tight with frustration, her eyes sharp with disappointment. "We're not what I thought," she said silently through her gaze. No apology, no charm could erase the truth. The man she thought she was gaining was already out of reach, gone in confidence, replaced by a woman who now held every key he once believed he possessed. The weight of his errors pressed down, leaving him breathless. Could he ever rise again, or had destiny already sealed his downfall? Rain pelted the windows of his lecky apartment, each drop echoing like a ticking clock counting his failures. The city lights reflected off the wet streets, but inside, the darkness was heavier, suffocating. He rehearsed apologies in his mind, every word measured, every tone calculated. Today he would go to her, not as a husband, but as a man seeking mercy, hoping she would see the remnant of the man he once was. Could she forgive the betrayal that had shattered her world? His car cut through the chaotic Lagos traffic, windshield wipers swishing frantically, mirroring his racing heart. Every honk and shout reminded him that the world had moved on without him. The mistress was distant, her ambition now focused elsewhere, leaving him alone with the realization that power had shifted irrevocably. He had abandoned a pregnant wife for comfort, only to find himself powerless against her rising empire. Would she even let him speak? The apartment building loomed in Lekki, gleaming under the stormy sky, yet it felt like a fortress keeping him out. He hesitated in the foyer, hands trembling as he held himself upright. Security cameras tracked his every move, a silent witness to a man undone. The receptionist's polite smile felt like judgment, and he realized that outside approval meant nothing. The woman he left was no longer waiting for his attention. She controlled the narrative now. Could he truly earn a second chance? Her mansion rose before him like a monument to her resilience, lights glowing warmly against the gray sky. He rang the doorbell, heart pounding like a drum. Seconds stretched into minutes. The door opened, and there she stood, radiant, composed, hand resting on the swell of her belly. His rehearsed words faltered. She did not rush to embrace him. This did not soften her gaze. Instead, she assessed him, measured him. Could this woman, once vulnerable, ever allow him back into her life? Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and polished wood, comforting yet foreign. He offered apologies, rehearsed and careful, but each word seemed to fall flat in the vastness of her presence. Her eyes held no warmth, only the calm authority of someone who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. Every apology he had practiced felt inadequate against the weight of what he had done. Could remorse alone restore what he had destroyed? He tried to explain, to justify, to plead, but she listened with measured silence. Her empire, her child, her inheritance, all untouchable by his remorse. He realized that humility was not a tactic. It was a requirement, a painful lesson carved into his soul. The power had shifted completely. He was no longer the decider of their fate. She was. Could he accept that the life he had abandoned had chosen a new path without him? As he turned to leave, the rain outside eased, the city continuing in its relentless rhythm. He looked back once, seeing her poised in the center of her living room, unshaken, commanding. The man who had once held all the cards now had none. His mistakes had delivered him to the doorstep of karma, and the realization settled heavy in his chest. Some doors, once closed, never reopen. Could he finally accept that the person he discarded had become the master of destiny, while he stood powerless at the threshold? Sunlight spilled into the living room of her Lecky mansion, casting gold over polished marble floors and towering windows. She stood there, hand resting gently on her belly, watching the city pulse below. The air was quiet, almost reverent. Everything that had once seemed fragile, her heart, her reputation, her future, had transformed into unshakable power. Money had not changed her. It had revealed the true faces of everyone around her. And as she breathed in the calm after the storm, she realized that the greatest inheritance her father had left wasn't wealth. It was foresight. Her husband's absence had become a distant echo, a lesson carved deep into her being. She remembered the pain, the humiliation, the cold betrayal, the day he walked out without a second thought. And now, standing as the sole heir to $1 billion legacy, she understood the magnitude of what he had lost. Character mattered more than comfort. Loyalty mattered more than ambition. And the child growing within her womb was a living reminder that strength often emerges from the seasons of deepest pain. Could she forgive, or had his loss sealed the story forever? The city outside buzzed with life, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded within these walls. Boardrooms replaced bedrooms, contracts replaced tears, and every decision she made echoed with intention. Her empire was not built on vengeance, but on purpose, on legacy, on motherhood, on the unwavering resolve to honor her father's hidden vision. The whispers of neighbors and the envious stares of distant relatives were irrelevant now. She had transcended judgment, understanding that respect born from love is precious, but respect born from foresight and action is unstoppable. She walked slowly through her father's study, touching the spines of books he had treasured, feeling the weight of wisdom in every corner. Each object, each framed photo, told stories of discipline, humility, and silent strength. Her father had prepared her for this moment in ways she hadn't realized until now. Every secret phone call, every discreet meeting, every act of quiet foresight had led to this inevitable turning of the tide. The realization washed over her. Destiny does not shout. It quietly rearranges itself until the right person stands in the center. Even her ex-husband, who once held all the power in their relationship, now existed in a world that no longer answered to him. Headlines had declared her rise. News of her inheritance spread like wildfire. The mistress who thought she had gained everything now faced the reality of instability and disappointment. And the man who left her? He was a cautionary tale, a lesson that choices have consequences, and that betrayal often carries a cost heavier than money or status. Would he ever grasp the magnitude of his own downfall? As she gazed out over the Lecky skyline, the wind brushing softly against her skin, she allowed herself a quiet smile. She was no longer defined by loss, by betrayal, or by the judgments of others. She had become a mother, a leader, a woman whose strength was forged in fire. Every setback had been a setup for her ultimate rise. And she understood now, more clearly than ever, that some divorces do not end marriages. They end destinies. The destiny she embraced was not just survival, it was supremacy. In the final silence, she placed a hand on her womb, feeling the gentle stir of life within, a reminder that legacy is not only measured in wealth or titles, but in the enduring strength passed from parent to child. Her father's vision had not failed. It had been realized in her rise. And as she looked toward the horizon, calm, powerful, unbroken, she knew one truth. Those who abandon others in their weakest season may walk away thinking they've won. But sometimes, the universe has a way of crowning the one they left behind. Destiny had chosen her.